Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere unexpected. You've been invited, yes, you specifically, to an exclusive midnight banquet in the Ethiopian highlands. The air smells like spiced smoke, roasted meats, and earth still damp from yesterday's rain. Torches flicker along mud brick walls, casting golden shadows over rows of flatbread and earthen bowls stacked with things you've never seen before and maybe don't want to. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat, your knees brushing against an embroidered cloak someone definitely spent weeks hand-stitching. Around you, nobles in lion-hide capes sip from horned goblets. Somewhere near the back, a priest blesses the dishes in gaze, the ancient liturgical language, while a drummer taps out a rhythm that somehow speeds up your heartbeat and relaxes your shoulders at the same time. Then a servant leans in and says, "Welcome to the table. We start with your hands." You glance down. No forks, no knives, no spoons. Just a round of injera, a sour, spongy flatbread, so large it practically doubles as a tablecloth. Its tangy smell hits you like a shot of vinegar wrapped in clouds. This isn't your standard dinner roll. This is your utensil, your napkin, your plate, and your challenge for the evening. You tear off a piece, feeling its stretchy texture, a little damp, a little springy, and wait for instruction. A woman across from you dips hers into a dark red stew and gestures for you to follow. "Scoop, not stab," she says. You try it, managing to pull up a bit of stew without dropping anything. A small victory. She nods approvingly. Injera is made from teff, a tiny ancient grain that's gluten-free and stubborn as a mule. It has to ferment for days before it's cooked on a clay griddle. That fermentation gives it a sour bite, not quite like sourdough, more like if lemon juice and yogurt had a really intense baby. Some historians argue teff might be the oldest cultivated grain still in use today, dating back over 5,000 years. Others say it's just the most patient one. As you eat, you notice a rhythm to the meal, everyone sharing from communal plates, tearing pieces of bread, and offering them to one another. It's a tradition called gursha, where feeding someone is a sign of deep respect. It's sweet until an elderly noble nearly pushes an entire pepper into your mouth with her fingers. "For courage," she says, "your sinuses start to burn." There's a quirk here, they say. How you eat matters more than what you eat. Using your left hand is a faux pas unless you want to start a polite scandal. And if you drop food on the mat, leave it. Picking it up is said to disturb the spirits of past meals, or maybe the chickens. Hard to say. Then a large clay basin is brought around, filled with warm, scented water. You're invited to wash your hands again, even though you just started. It's ceremonial cleansing before the real dishes arrive. The smell reminds you of wild basil and eucalyptus, both of which grow freely along Ethiopia's rugged plateaus. You hear a goat bleat in the distance. Somewhere in the shadows, a servant blows into a curved animal horn announcing the next course. And just as you think you might be settling in, boom, your cushion shifts. A small child has appeared behind you, holding a wooden tray, stacked with more injera. You smile and they stare at you like you've just asked for ketchup at a sacred ceremony. Historians still argue whether medieval Ethiopian banquets were primarily political showcases or spiritual offerings. The reality, probably both. These feasts weren't just about impressing guests or feeding bellies. They were rituals, performances, power displays, and communal prayers, all rolled into one steamy, spicy evening. As you lean back, the stars visible through a high window, you hear a lull in the drumming. Someone passes around a small dish of honey to sweeten the mouth. It's a quiet moment, a breath between flavors. You're just getting started. You're starting to get the hang of it. Now the tearing, the scooping of the shared bowls. But just as your fingers dry from the wash basin, a steaming clay platter is placed before you. It's red, deep volcanic red. You smell garlic ginger and something that might be cardamom, but the dominant note is fire. This is dorowat, the national pride of Ethiopian cuisine. A stew that simmers chicken in Berber, a spice mix that could easily double as a flamethrower. The sauce clings to the chicken like lava to stone. One noble near you scoffs gently. "Only 7 kinds of berbere," he mutters. "Not fit for funerals." You go in with a fresh piece of injera, scooping a generous amount. The moment it hits your tongue, your eyes widen. It's hot, not just spicy, but temperature hot, like it's still bubbling in your mouth. But then comes the burn, a slow creeping wave that starts on your lips and rolls across your gums like a judgment from the gods. The chicken is tender, almost collapsing into the stew. Hiding in the mixture is a surprise, a hard-boiled egg dyed brick red from the sauce. A quiet young monk across the table leans over and whispers, "The egg is for strength. You'll need it." Berbeer, the soul of this dish, is not a single spice but a symphony. Chilies, fenugreek, coriander, cinnamon, cumin, cloves, all roasted, ground, and aged. There's a debate among culinary historians whether berbere originated from the Aksumite spice trade or evolved independently among highland tribes. Some argue the use of dried chili suggests Portuguese influence after the 16th century, but others point to local wild peppers predating that by centuries. Either way, your mouth is on fire, and you have questions about your life choices. You reach for water mistake. It spreads the heat. Milk not on offer. A woman to your right passes you a small dark honeycomb. You chew it. It helps. Slightly. There's a fringe theory that some elite banquets in medieval Ethiopia deliberately pushed the limits of heat to act as tests of spiritual purity. The hotter you could handle, the purer your soul, or the more damaged your taste buds. It's unclear. The vibe at the table shifts. People watch you now, smiling, nodding, approving. You've survived your first real bite. The noblewoman who fed you earlier pats your hand. "Not bad," she says. Next, maybe you won't cry. You catch your breath and notice others pairing the Dora Wat with tart cheese, ayib, a crumbly cottage-like curd with no salt. It's gentle a cushion against the fire. The contrast is oddly comforting, like cooling your forehead with a snowball after a slap. From a corner of the hall, an elder priest begins to chant softly, hands raised. As his voice rises, bowls are lifted and heads bowed. You follow suit, realizing you're part of something more than just dinner. Historians still debate the balance of sacred versus secular in these meals. Was the banquet meant to honor a deity, a ruler, or simply the harvest? Perhaps all at once. In a kingdom where emperors claimed descent from Solomon, even the chicken stew had theological implications. As the chanting fades, the laughter returns. One guest coughs dramatically from the spice, and the table roars with delight. Another tries to mop their forehead with their injera social faux pas. A servant quietly replaces their bread without a word. You lean back slightly, your stomach warm, your tongue tingling, and your hands lightly stained red. You're starting to understand this isn't just a meal, it's a rite of passage. But the night is young, and the raw meat is coming next. The stew's fire still simmers in your chest when the next dish arrives uncooked, unflinching, and completely unapologetic. It's kitfo. A large, shallow wooden bowl is laid before you filled with what looks like a finely minced pile of ruby red beef. No steam, no sizzle, no disguise. A noble on your left leans in. "It's raw," he says helpfully, "but don't worry, it's blessed." You blink, trying to smile. The meat is glistening, bathed in niter kibi, Ethiopia's spiced, clarified butter. You catch the scent, warm, floral, and oddly welcoming, like cardamom, clove, oregano, maybe a hint of garlic. A sprig of something green sits on top, decorative or deadly, you're not sure. Everyone watches. You tear off another piece of injera thinner this time and scoop some of the meat onto it. It's surprisingly tender, velvety almost, and not at all cold. One bite in and you realize this isn't just raw, it's seasoned confidence, rich, earthy, with a warm peppery kick that lands somewhere between comforting and vaguely thrilling. The noble nods again. That cow is blessed twice, died under a holy moon. Then, without further ceremony, he shovels a fistful into his mouth like it's popcorn. Kitfo isn't just food, it's status. In medieval Ethiopia, serving raw meat was a symbol of trust, power, and intimacy. The meat had to be fresh, the spices precise, and the butter properly infused. Some say it was reserved only for holy days or weddings. Others argue it appeared any time the lord of the house felt generous or competitive. Historians still argue whether kitfo's popularity emerged from Christian fasting practices, which banned animal fats and cooked meat at times, or from warrior culture where eating raw signified both speed and courage. Either way, you feel a little braver for having tried it, or slightly reckless. There's a curious tradition with kitfo. It's often served alongside a side dish called gomen, a chopped green cooked with garlic and mild spices, and ayib, that crumbly cheese again. These aren't just sides. They're safeguards, cool, soft textures meant to balance the raw richness. Without them, your stomach might stage a quiet rebellion by midnight. A fringe theory insists that kitpho was once consumed as a pre-battle meal. Supposedly, warriors believed the raw beef imbued them with the cow's strength, unbroken, unburned by fire. Cooked meat dies twice, an old saying goes. Raw meat, only once. Just like you, if you eat it wrong. You chew slowly, trying not to think about it. Across the hall, a group of children watch you eat with wide eyes and covered giggles. They whisper among themselves, and one of them runs off, returning with what looks like a carved wooden cow decorated in beads. It's placed gently on the floor beside you. A joke, a blessing, a threat. No one explains. The kitpho lingers not just in your mouth, but in your senses. It's primal but refined. Ancient, but oddly modern, like steak tartare's older, tougher cousin who fought in 5 wars and still grinds his own spices by hand. Then something unexpected happens. The room goes quiet. A priest steps forward and blesses the meat in silence. You're told this is an old custom blessing, the cow's sacrifice, even retroactively. A final act of gratitude. The mood is almost meditative. The candles flicker. A drum taps lightly like a heartbeat. And for a brief moment surrounded by raw meat strangers and ritual, you feel strangely at peace. But don't get too comfortable. The next dish has been sitting in a vat of butter for weeks. You've just adjusted to raw meat when the aroma shifts again, thicker, heavier, and undeniably rich. A covered clay pot is brought to the table, carried with both reverence and muscle. When the lid is lifted, a wave of warmth escapes that smells like browned butter, dry herbs, and something older, earthy animal, and faintly gamey. Inside is what looks like a curled mass of meat, browned and glistening. As the steam thins, someone explains this is butter-cured lamb, a whole young sheep that's been preserved not with salt, but with layers upon layers of seasoned niterkiba, spiced and clarified to perfection. You blink. Butter, preserved meat. Oh yes. In medieval Ethiopian highland kitchens, butter wasn't just a cooking fat. It was a preservative, a guardian, a culinary time capsule. Meat could be submerged in vats of spiced butter for weeks, even months, developing deeper flavor while warding off rot. It's not unlike medieval European confit, but with a fragrant twist cardamom koseret leaf and garlic slow danced inside that fat until everything tasted like a royal hearth. You tear a piece of the lamb with your fingers so tender it comes apart like warm clay. The outer layer is rich and golden, almost sweet. The inside is shockingly moist, a perfect contrast. You raise it to your mouth and bite, and it doesn't melt. It evaporates. A man near you explains in a low voice. The fat remembers the moon it was born under. You nod slowly, even though you have no idea what he means. Historians still argue whether butter preservation was common among all social classes or reserved for elite households with access to vast dairies and herds. Some claim this was a royal practice, only a secret passed through kitchen lineages. Others point to folk songs that reference everyday shepherds storing meat this way during times of drought. The truth may lie in between. Quirky detail. The butter used in this preparation is sometimes tinted with ash or crushed herbs, both for spiritual protection and practical insect repellent. Yes, herbal bug-proof butter was a real thing. If the food didn't kill you, the flies might have tried. One elderly matriarch at the table tells you a story about how butter-cured meat was offered during funerals not to mourners but to the spirits. The scent would draw the ancestors in. Whether for communion or critique is up for interpretation. You eat slowly because this is not fast food, it's meditative. The richness of the butter starts to coat your lips, your tongue, even your thoughts. Someone brings around a small dish of vinegar tea to cut through the fat, and it works. Barely. And then you spot it at the bottom of the pot, a bundle of herbs wrapped in palm fiber still steeping in butter. It's not meant to be eaten, you're told, but the scent keeps the butter spirits happy. You make a mental note not to anger anything made of fat. As you reach for another piece, a servant replaces your injera again. The new one is warm and slightly crisp, like it just came off the mitad griddle. You press it into the lamb, soaking up golden fat, and bite again. The silence at the table is approving. There's a comfort to this dish. Yes, it's unfamiliar and a little surreal, but it's also grounding. Buttermeat, thyme, and fire. The kind of food that doesn't just feed you, but steadies you. A few guests pat their stomachs, smiling. Others roll their necks or crack their knuckles, preparing for the next course. You feel the same, except instead of cracking your knuckles, you try not to let your eyes roll back from fullness. But your journey is just beginning. Next, something sweet, something weird, and possibly still watching you. Just when you think you've got a handle on things. Raw meat, butter-cured lamb, ceremonial hand-washing, the next course arrives in an unassuming basket. It's lined with leaves, fragrant and glossy, and nestled within is what looks like a face. You squint. Yes, that's definitely a face, or at least part of one. A roasted goat's head, expertly carved and delicately arranged, greets you with one intact eyeball, some delicate cheek meat, and what you think might be a nose. It glistens beneath a drizzle of golden honey and crushed rose petals. This is goat face with honey, and it's not a prank. It's a delicacy. A servant gestures to the side of the platter, where smaller cuts, tongue, jaw, meat, ear slices are set aside, fanned like petals around a single, almost glowing eyeball. You feel like it's staring into your soul, asking hard questions about your courage and commitment to cross-cultural dining. The noble to your left chuckles and nudges the dish toward you. Eat the cheek, he says. The eye is only for the host. Good. The cheek is soft and richly flavored with crispy edges from the roasting and a sweet glaze from the forest honey, which gives it floral depth. You weren't expecting the rose petals, but they somehow work delicate, perfumed, slightly bitter. It's a bite that confuses your senses in the best possible way. This dish is all about contrast savory and sweet rich and floral muscle and marrow. And yes, it's theatrical. In medieval Ethiopia, a banquet wasn't just about eating. It was performance, power, and pageantry. The presentation of a goat's head wasn't just culinary, it was symbolic. A whole head meant you were offering your guests everything, nothing withheld, no scraps. Historians still debate whether dishes like this were ceremonial sacrifices to ancestors or practical displays of frugality and skill, making sure no part of the animal went to waste. Either way, here it is, in front of you. With a smile, maybe, a quirky tidbit. In some regions of Ethiopia, guests are chosen to eat specific parts of the head as omens. The ear means you're a good listener. The tongue means you'll speak truth. The eye, that's either wisdom or surveillance, depends on the village. You're handed a small carving knife, its bone handle etched with patterns. It's more symbolic than useful. Everything is already sliced. Still, the motion matters. You're participating. You're showing respect. You lift a slice of tongue gingerly and lay it on your injera. It's tender and somehow refreshing, seasoned with cloves and thyme. You eat it, nod, and receive approving murmurs. Then the host lifts the eyeball with his fingers, smiles broadly, and pops it into his mouth like a grape. The room cheers softly, and you suddenly feel like you just witnessed a coronation. Goat is a cornerstone of Ethiopian pastoral culture, and in medieval times, herding was as much about spiritual duty as it was about sustenance. The head of the goat, especially when offered whole, was believed by some to carry the animal's final memory. Eating it was seen as both release and communion. The laughter returns. Someone jokes about seeing visions after eating goat brain. Another guest teases that the host is now all-seeing. You smile even as you double-check that your own serving contains no unexpected organs. As the platter is cleared, a woman pours rose water over your hands again. She dabs your fingers with a silk cloth embroidered with lions. The scent lingers, mingling with roasted meat and honey. You sit back and exhale. You've eaten something most people wouldn't dare to look at on a plate, and you kind of liked it. But now the smell changes again. A deep river mud scent. Something sour, something old. The fish is coming. You notice the shift before the next dish even enters the room. The smell arrives first, strong sour and slightly sulfurous. It hangs in the air like damp reeds left in the sun with notes of smoked wood and something faintly metallic. Guests begin to sit straighter. Some smile in anticipation, others mutter prayers under their breath. Then it's carried in a woven basket lined with banana leaves filled with fermented river fish. Specifically aged catfish caught from the highland rivers winding through Ethiopia's jagged escarpments. The meat is grayish-pink, slick with oils and dark sauces, and lightly garnished with slivers of garlic-green chili and what looks like crushed charcoal. Your host beams proudly. Fish of the ghosts, he says. Good for seeing what hides in the dark. You are to put it politely concerned. The smell is aggressive. Not quite rotten, but definitely confrontational. One guest waves the scent toward their nose like a perfume. Another taps the rim of the dish 3 times, a superstition said, to ward off spirits that may have followed the fish upstream. You're not sure if they're joking. You scoop a small bite using your injera, careful to grab a piece with more sauce than flesh. The texture is soft, almost custard-like, but the flavor is wild, funky, salty, deep. Imagine sardines that went spelunking in a cave filled with wet campfires and came back changed. Some historians believe fermented fish dishes like this may have originated as offerings to river spirits or ancestral guardians, especially during long famines or droughts. The idea was to preserve protein, not just for sustenance, but for ritual. Others argue it was purely practical, a way to avoid wasting excess catch in regions without salt mines or refrigeration. Historians still argue whether these kinds of fish preparations were a regular feature in royal feasts or saved only for ritual occasions such as death anniversaries or eclipse nights. The debate continues in dusty manuscripts and damp clay scrolls found near old monastery kitchens. A quirky legend floats around. Some believed the bones of fermented catfish could sing if boiled under a full moon. Another story claims that eating the dish at midnight grants you a vision of your future spouse. Yet another says it keeps evil spirits away from your house for 7 days, or possibly invites them in depending on the recipe. One elderly monk to your right delicately removes a fish spine and places it on his tongue like a communion wafer. You try not to stare. You take a second bite, and this time it lands more gently. There's heat from the chilly brightness from lemon leaves and earthiness from the banana wrapping. You begin to understand the appeal, not just the taste, but the ritual of eating something that feels so alive with memory. This isn't just dinner, it's dialogue with the dead. You're offered a sip of barley beer to wash it down, and for once you accept without hesitation. It's warm and mildly fizzy, brewed with wild hops and clay-filtered water. The slightly sweet taste balances the fish, numbing your tongue just enough to keep going. As the dish is passed along, a servant circles the room with a clay censer wafting frankincense smoke into the air. It's said to purify the space after fermented food, just in case a ghost did hitch a ride on a fishbone. You glance around and realize no one's left the table. Everyone's still here, chewing slowly, reverently, even the children. And just when your taste buds begin to relax, a new platter is brought in. Something flat, something gray, and someone whispers, "Ah, the bread that sees beyond the grave." You're not sure what that means, but you're about to find out. The next dish doesn't arrive on a plate. It arrives on a stone slab, flat, dark, and faintly warm, like it's been sitting near a fire for hours or maybe centuries. On it lies a single round loaf of bread, ash gray in color, rimmed with scorched edges and faintly etched with markings that could be either burn patterns or sacred script. Someone to your right murmurs, "Ah, the resurrection bread." This is Kita flatbread baked with ashes and holy herbs, traditionally prepared only during new moon's funerals, and the rare feast in which memory itself is the honored guest. You're told it's meant to taste like forgetting and remembering at the same time. Chew on that literally. You tear a piece from the loaf. It crumbles at the edges but holds firm in the center, slightly chewy, with a bitter smell, smoke thyme, and something earthy like old roots. You pop it in your mouth. It tastes like firewood and soil with a strangely sweet aftertaste like burned sugarcane. And beneath it all, the unmistakable tang of teff flour, coarse and ancient. Kita was often used in ritual ceremonies, particularly during mourning or major seasonal transitions. According to some monastic scrolls, this bread was laid on graves before being fed to the living, symbolizing a transfer of memory. Others claim it was baked by wise women in hidden valleys, its ingredients chosen not for taste, but for omens. Whether the dough cracked, bubbled, or rose just right could mean good rains or political disasters. Historians still debate whether Kita was ever truly a banquet dish, or more of a clandestine bread served at pre-dawn ceremonies and smuggled into imperial meals as a silent message. The markings burned into the crust, possibly family crests, or perhaps just the signature of a very opinionated oven. There's a fringe belief that some keto loaves were read like fortune-telling cards. A burned edge meant heartbreak. A bubble near the center foretold pregnancy. A perfect round loaf that meant peace for a little while. Your host explains this one was baked with acacia ash fennel seeds and a single drop of wild honey. Not enough to sweeten it, just enough to confuse your tongue. It reminds us that bitterness doesn't always stay bitter, he says. You nod, still chewing. The flavor evolves as it lingers. One guest swears she tastes iron. Another claims citrus. A priest simply smiles and says, "It tastes like your past." There's ceremony here. Everyone eats in silence, breaking off small pieces and placing one on their tongue without chewing, holding it there like a prayer. You mimic them. The bread softens slowly, its flavors deepening into something woody, grassy, ancestral. You close your eyes. The sounds of the banquet fade, replaced by the slow crackling of the fire and distant laughter. Someone singing in a language you don't know, and your bones feel heavy, grounded. You're not sure if it's the bread, or the room, or your own tiredness, but for a moment you feel outside of time, like this meal isn't happening now, but has always been happening, looping like a dream at the edge of memory. And then just as quickly, it ends. The slab is cleared, the silence breaks, laughter returns, and with it, the scent of something boiling, something thick, something predictive. You hear someone say, "Time to see what the porridge says." You're still processing resurrection bread, and now the porridge is going to talk. You smile nervously and wait for the next mystery to unfold. A servant approaches with a deep wooden bowl, steaming and bubbling with a slow, sticky rhythm. The color is hard to pin down, somewhere between deep brown and smoky gray, with swirls of red oil gliding lazily across the surface. It looks like the kind of thing that could either nourish you for days or summon rain if poured on the right rock. This is sorghum porridge, known locally as marca or genfo, depending on the preparation. But tonight, it's not just food, it's a divination tool. You glance at the host, who gestures toward the surface of the porridge with the solemnity of someone showing you your own reflection. "Watch how it moves," he says. "It knows what season is coming." You're skeptical because it's porridge, but you look anyway. The surface shimmers. A slow bubble breaks in the center, then two smaller bubbles rise near the edge and pop at the same time. Guests murmur. An old woman nods. "Double bubble," she whispers, "means early harvest." Right. You take a bite. The texture is dense but smooth, like warm clay with ambition. Sorghum has a nutty, slightly sweet flavor, but this version is mixed with spiced ghee, wild garlic, and a mysterious powder someone only refers to as valley salt. It sticks to your tongue in a way that feels inevitable, heavy, comforting, like being wrapped in a very old blanket you found in a cave. One of the monks ladles a bit into his bowl and taps it 3 times with his spoon before eating. Tradition. Then he tilts the bowl and watches how it slides. "That's a good flow," he mutters. Historically, this kind of porridge wasn't just a meal. It was a tool of augury, especially among rural highland communities. Before major planting seasons, women would prepare it at dawn, watching how it bubbled, where the oil settled, how the steam curled. It was believed the porridge spoke to those who listened. Others say that was just the result of eating too much fermented butter beforehand. Historians still argue whether this practice was genuinely spiritual or simply symbolic, a way to calm nerves before a risky planting season. Some believe it was a secret calendar system hidden in cuisine. Others dismiss it as Highland folklore passed along with too much mead and not enough science. You dip your injera into the center of the bowl, scooping from the place where the oil glistens. It's richer there and a bit spicier. You feel your limbs relax. The porridge doesn't just feed, it settles you. A quirky tidbit: there's a saying that if you stir genfo clockwise while singing, it will bring good luck. Counterclockwise, a sudden hailstorm. Whether that's metaphorical or meteorological is unclear. Suddenly, someone begins to hum a low circular tune that loops like the swirl of the porridge. Others join in softly. It's not a song exactly. It's more like a mood that fills the room. You find yourself tapping your fingers in rhythm against your bowl without knowing why. The porridge is passed down the table and you hear one guest chuckle. "Mine bubbled left. That means goats will wander." Laughter follows. Someone else mutters about dreams and digging sticks. You finish your portion and feel grounded. The dish is humble, yes, but it has presence. It doesn't beg for attention, it holds it, like the earth itself. Then you hear a chime. A servant lifts the next dish high above her head, and a floral scent wafts toward you. The bread and porridge are fading. What arrives next is a shock of color. Orange, gold, green lentils, but not like you've ever seen. Perfumed, decorated, mysterious, and quite possibly laced with dreams. The bowl placed before you is beautiful shallow, carved from polished wood, and inlaid with tiny patterns of ivory and shell. But it's the contents that really catch your eye. A shimmering mosaic of lentils, orange and golden, speckled with herbs and petals, resting in a pool of oil so fragrant it practically sings. Welcome to the Queen's perfumed lentils. Steam rises in curls that smell of rosewater, fenugreek, turmeric, and something elusive, sweet, but sharp, like a forgotten spice hidden in silk. The surface glistens, decorated with edible marigold petals and what looks like a dusting of powdered frankincense. You hesitate. These lentils smell more like perfume than food. You half expect someone to dab a little behind your ears. A younger noble leans over and says, "They say she dreamed this recipe. In a temple. With lions." You nod politely, not entirely sure who she is, or whether lions typically inspire legumes. You take a bite. The texture is creamy with the occasional soft pop of a lentil that held its shape. But the flavor is what really floors you. Earthy, yes, but layered with floral notes and faint citrus, as if someone mixed a garden with a spice caravan and decided to make dinner. It's deliberately complex, a recipe clearly made not just to nourish, but to intrigue, and perhaps to lull. Halfway through your second bite, your shoulders slump a little, your eyelids feel heavy. You shake it off, but the sensation is there. A quiet, dreamy softness curling at the edges of your thoughts. Historians still argue whether perfumed dishes like this were actual banquet fare or sacred offerings adapted for the court. Some believe this kind of lentil stew originated in monasteries infused with prayer and plant lore. Others trace it to royal kitchens, where queens competed to create dishes that could soothe, seduce, or subdue a tense gathering. And there's a fringe theory that this specific dish was once used as a subtle sedative offered to restless nobles or diplomatic guests whose tongues needed softening. Not poison, just persuasion, in edible form. You glance around the table. Several guests are chewing slowly, now their eyes distant, their movements fluid. A priest gently swirls his lentils with the back of his spoon, humming a low tune. The host looks completely at peace. The room itself feels slower, thicker, like warm honey poured across a drumskin. The combination of spices here isn't accidental. Fenugreek, known locally as abesh, has long been associated with calming properties. Rose water, introduced centuries ago via trade routes, was used not just for its scent, but for its supposed ability to open the heart to truth. And then there's the oil. It carries the lentils like a ship gliding across memory. A quirky detail. Some banquet records suggest the dish was once served only at night and only to women. Others say the petals were originally used to write short poems in the oil before stirring tiny verses of love, warning, or prophecy. You try another bite. The flavor deepens. The rose lingers, the turmeric sings, and something cool, maybe cardamom, dances across your tongue. You're not just eating, you're being softened. A guest across from you sighs contentedly. Tastes like remembering a lullaby, she says. You nod. It does. And for a moment, you forget that you're sitting on a woven mat with roasted goat behind you and porridge prophecies in your belly. All that matters is this one bite and how it makes you feel just light enough to float. But before you drift too far, someone claps loudly. The next dish is coming. It smells like rusted iron and brown sugar, and it glows red. Someone whispers blood butter. You're still swimming in rose-scented dreams when a sharp metallic aroma slices through the air. It hits your nose, first warm iron-singed spice and brown fat, all swirling into something primal. Your eyes refocus just as a heavy dish lands in front of you with a dull, wet sound. This is blood butter, a deep red smear in a wide clay bowl, glossy thick and unapologetically intense. Around it are wedges of barley bread and short stalks of baked enset, a starchy banana-like plant used for both eating and wrapping things you'd rather not touch barehanded. You hesitate. A guard beside the host dips his bread confidently, then tears it with his teeth, like it owes him money. You follow cautiously. The texture is smooth, almost mousse-like. The taste bold, metallic, spiced with Berber nutmeg, maybe clove, and a kind of fatty depth that says this is not vegetarian. Because it's not. The main ingredient is ox blood slowly cooked down with niter kibbeh, spiced butter, and thickened with barley flour or mashed root. It's a dish once reserved for warriors hunters and those who returned from long campaigns. A reward, a right of return. The idea of eating blood might seem shocking to you, but here it's tied to power, health, and even spiritual clarity. In some regions, this dish was seen as a way to reclaim your strength. In others, it was a shield eaten before battle to protect the body and confuse evil spirits. One tale even insists that blood butter, when eaten in silence by 7 men, can reveal who among them is a traitor. You glance around uneasily. Historians still argue whether dishes like this were born of necessity, nothing wasted even the blood, or if they were part of ceremonial rebirth rituals where blood represented the turning of a season or the start of a ruler's reign. Some suggest they were transitional meals served at moments of profound change, like births, deaths, or new alliances. And then there's the quirky bit. Some tribes once whipped the butter until it foamed, believing the bubbles represented trapped spirits of ancestors rising to the surface to give their blessing. So yes, Grandma might be in your appetizer. You dip your bread again, this time a little braver. The richness is intense, but there's something grounding about it too, like chewing on thunder. A warmth spreads through your limbs, slow and confident. You get why the King's Guard ate this stuff. You feel stronger, warmer, slightly invincible, or maybe just very full. To your right, a young man dips his bread and pauses. "This one always tastes like remembering something I didn't know I'd forgotten," he says. You're not sure what that means, but you nod solemnly anyway. It seems appropriate. Then someone starts to hum, the same melody from the porridge, but slower now. A deeper drum beat joins. The mood shifts again from mystical to martial. You notice the guard sit straighter. The air has weight. The host raises a spoon. "To the blood that keeps us," he says quietly. Everyone eats in unison. And, just like that, the bowl is empty. The flavor lingers, though, on your tongue, in your breath, in your chest. It's not something you wash down. It stays. It settles. Then a sharp bell rings, and the room exhales. A servant enters with a covered platter, steam rising from under the lid. You hear someone whisper, "Now comes the cheese of ash." You gulp, because of course there's cheese. And of course it's crusted in ash. You barely have time to process the blood butter still clinging to the back of your throat with smoky persistence when the next dish is revealed. A wide ceramic plate is uncovered with a gentle sweep of linen, releasing a puff of warm herbal scent. Sitting in the center, like a moon risen too soon, is a round ball of goat cheese coated in a fine crust of ash and thyme. It's striking. The surface is soft gray, flecked with soot, and crushed leaves, almost velvety in appearance. The edges look slightly singed, as if it had been briefly kissed by fire, or forgotten in a chimney. This is the ash-crusted cheese of the Highlands, and it's far more than a snack. You slice a piece, soft, dense, and slightly springy. The ash layer crumbles into your fingers, dusting them with ghost-colored flakes. You bring it to your lips, and immediately, the salt and smoke hit you. But then comes the goat's milk, rich tangy, with a whisper of sourness that seems to come and go with each chew. It's alive with contradiction, gritty, and creamy, bitter, and bright. In medieval Ethiopia, goat cheese wasn't just food, it was medicine currency and sacred offering. This version, aged in underground clay jars, was made only by herder monks in the Simeon Mountains, using milk from goats blessed with incense smoke. According to local legend, the ash used to coat the cheese had to come from a fire, lit with 7 sacred herbs: koseret, basil, thyme, rue sage, eucalyptus, and a touch of frankincense resin. Some say the ash protected the cheese from spirits, others from flies. Either way, it gave the cheese a longer shelf life and a spiritual resume most yogurts can only dream of. Historians still argue whether this cheese was ever a standard dish at banquets or reserved solely for monastic fasting periods. One camp insists it was eaten only during lunar eclipses. Another believes it was traded to royal courts in exchange for silk and salt. Some sources claim it was never supposed to be consumed at all, merely displayed as a symbol of restraint and self-mastery. You look down at the half-eaten slice in your hand and wonder if you've just broken some kind of vow. The host seems unconcerned. He bites into his with a satisfied hum, then dips it briefly into a small dish of smoked honey, as if daring the cheese to get even more interesting. You try the same. The result is oddly addictive sweet and earthy, soft and gritty smoke and sugar-holding hands. A quirky belief. Some shepherds once wrote prayers directly onto the cheese using sharp sticks dipped in goat blood. The idea was that the cheese could absorb divine will and offer protection to the herder during storm season. One 13th century poem even calls this cheese the wheel of silence, eaten only after long fasts and solemn chants. You try not to imagine what's written in the slice currently melting on your tongue. A priest nearby suddenly begins to recite a blessing in Ge'ez, punctuated by the jingling of tiny bells. Guests pause, bow their heads, and finish their cheese in silence. It feels less like dinner and more like a moment from a dream, a bite too quiet, too deliberate not to be holy. The cheese is cleared. The ashes remain on your fingertips and maybe your soul. You wipe your hands with a cloth that smells of rosemary and wood smoke. Then cheering breaks out at the far end of the table. Not formal applause, but raucous delight like the punchline of a long joke. Because what's coming next isn't solemn. It isn't sacred. It's fermented. It's fizzy. And it's probably going to make the room spin. You're about to meet Tej, the honey wine of kings and unpredictable uncles. You hear it before you see it. The clink of horn cups, the ripple of laughter rising like bubbles in a brew, the low, playful rhythm of a hand-held drum that seems to say, "Get ready, stranger." Then the vessels arrive, curved goat horns polished to a deep black shine, each filled to the brim with golden liquid that glows like sunrise through amber. This is Tej, Ethiopia's legendary honey wine, equal parts celebration ritual, and depending on the batch, accidental misadventure. One is passed to you. The horn is warm from hand-to-hand travel. You lift it carefully and inhale. The scent is rich and heady wildflower honey, crushed leaves, and something sharp beneath it, gesho, a bittering herb traditionally used in place of hops. It's vaguely medicinal and mildly threatening. You take a cautious sip. Whoa, it's sweet, then sour, then sharp. Then it burns. Not like whiskey, more like an impatient white wine with secrets and a cousin in the herbalist trade. A little like mead, but wilder. Definitely fermented. Possibly sentient. Tej was a mainstay of royal and noble banquets in medieval Ethiopia, brewed in clay vessels and served in barrellies flask-like containers or horns for special occasions. It was often brewed at home with recipes passed down matrilineally, each batch infused with regional flowers, herbs, and risk. And because fermentation time varied, so did strength. Some sips lifted your spirit, others knocked it flat. Historians still argue whether Tej was originally a sacred drink tied to marriage rites and oaths, or a domestic staple elevated by royal adoption. Some sources suggest early emperors used it in coronation rituals, others that it was banned periodically because it clouded judgment during council, a ban that never stuck. A quirky bit: certain hosts would season their brew by burying it underground for 40 days, then uncovering it during a feast and serving it with a chant. Some believed the wine absorbed ancestral memory, others just liked it strong. After your third sip, the room softens at the edges. The firelight feels warmer. The drums are louder now or closer. A noble across the table leans in, raising his horn. May your thoughts be too slippery to catch, he toasts. You clink horns. You sip more, trying to pace yourself, but the taste grows addictive. Sweetness backed by quiet bitterness, like someone whispering a joke while braiding your hair. Every guest seems to be at a different stage of TJ revelation, some quiet and introspective, others boisterous and red-faced retelling stories that possibly never happened. A young woman offers you a second horn, this one darker, almost syrupy. Stronger batch, she warns, smiling. You take it anyway. It tastes like burnt honey and forgotten weddings. You're told that Tej rituals were highly personal. Some believed in sipping from only one horn per evening to keep the soul whole. Others insisted the horn must be passed in a clockwise circle, or the blessings would spoil. And there's a superstition that spilling Tej on your foot means you've invited love or debt into your life. You don't spill any, but you hold the horn tighter now. Somewhere in the haze of honey and gesho, a man stands and begins a Tej chant voice, low and slurred, but rhythmic. Others join. It's not quite a song, more like a collective memory forming in real time. You feel a pulse through the floor, or maybe through your chest. And then the music shifts. The host claps once, and the horns are gently taken away. Guests sigh and stretch. A few lie back on cushions, already adrift. But your journey isn't over. Now comes a dish for those who see the unseen, a dish that smokes before it's touched, that hums when stirred, that lingers long after the fire's out. The coffee is coming, and you'd better be ready because it doesn't just wake you up. It opens the soul. You barely have time to miss the Tej when the next transformation begins not with a platter, but with sound. From the far end of the banquet hall, a low clicking begins, stone against metal, then soft laughter, then a sudden whoosh, the unmistakable breath of fire lighting under a clay pot. The room quiets, not out of reverence this time, but anticipation. This is no ordinary beverage break. This is the Ethiopian coffee ceremony, and tonight it's not winding things down, it's summoning the ancestors. The roasting starts first. A servant approaches carrying a wide metal tray filled with green coffee beans, shaking them over glowing coals in a small brazier. The scent builds fast, smoky, grassy, earthy. Then something shifts. Suddenly the beans crackle and pop, turning brown, then dark, then nearly black. The aroma transforms into a hypnotic richness that seems to rise and fall in waves. You inhale deeply. It's unlike any coffee scent you've ever known, deeper, like roasted wood cinnamon and the memory of thunderstorms. A priest begins to chant softly. The guests lean in, eyes half-lidded, as the roasted beans are ground by hand with a mortar and pestle made from volcanic rock, each motion deliberate, rhythmic, oddly soothing. The grounds are spooned into a jabain, a bulbous clay pot with a long, slender neck. Water is added, and the whole vessel is placed directly onto the embers. Then comes the waiting. Not awkward wholly, a time to reflect, to breathe, to remember, a moment of caffeinated mindfulness. The first cup is poured black as ink, steaming like breath, and served in tiny ceramic bowls with no handles. You're offered yours. You sip. Bitterness hits first, sharp and bright, then an earthy depth like cedar and leather, and finally an unexpected floral finish that lingers. This isn't just coffee, it's revelation. In Ethiopian tradition, the coffee ceremony unfolds in 3 rounds, abul tona and baraka. The first awakens the body, the second calms the spirit, and the third bestows blessing. Each round is weaker in strength, but deeper in meaning. You've just completed abul. 2 more to go. Historians still argue whether the medieval version of the ceremony resembled today's, or whether it was more spontaneous, a gesture of hospitality rather than a spiritual unfolding. What's certain is that the beans themselves, originating in the Ethiopian highlands, were part of daily life and divine conversation centuries before the first European cafe opened its doors. A quirky tradition. In some villages, coffee wasn't just for the living. During certain lunar phases, a portion of the third round baraka was poured onto the ground for the ancestors to drink. You look down at your cup, then briefly at the stone floor, just in case. The second round begins. This one is smoother, warmer, almost creamy, despite the lack of milk. The bitterness is gone, replaced by a clarity like mist lifting from a mountain ridge. Conversation resumes, but softer now, threaded with reflection and memory. You find yourself saying very little and listening more. The walls flicker with shadows. The jabena gurgles softly as the third brew is prepared. When the final round is served, the priest raises his bowl and murmurs a word you don't catch, but you understand the meaning in your bones. You sip. It's gentle, almost watery, but you feel something settle inside you, like a stone placed lovingly into a riverbed. The wind outside shifts. The fire crackles. Somewhere in the dark, a jackal howls. And someone places a bowl of insects in front of you. Yes, insects. They are glistening, and you are still expected to eat them. The piece from the coffee lingers on your tongue like a fading hymn until it's violently replaced by the unmistakable crackle of roasted exoskeletons. You blink. Surely that's not what you think it is. But it is. A shallow clay bowl is placed gently before you. Inside, a heaping mound of roasted insects. Some still have wings. Others are just shiny, crisp bodies curled in their final pose. A few are coated in red powder, others glazed with something sticky and sweet. One especially large termite stares at you from the top of the pile like it owns the place. Welcome to the dish known only as feasting ants. You glance around. No one else looks concerned. In fact, several guests are already popping them in their mouths like peanuts at a royal sports match. One noble even dips his insect in a thick chili paste before crunching it like a man who knows no fear. So you go for the small one. It crunches with surprising satisfaction. The flavor nutty, a little smoky, hints of paprika lime zest, and something undeniably earthy like the smell of dry leaves after rain. Weirdly, it's good. You grab a second one before your courage changes its mind. Insect consumption isn't just a quirky medieval stunt, it was, and still is in many parts of Ethiopia, a seasonal delicacy, especially during rainy periods when termites emerge in swarms. Rather than waste a protein source that literally falls from the sky, locals would gather roast season and serve often with spices, honey, or even crushed lentils. Historians still argue whether these dishes appeared in formal banquets or stayed within rural traditions. Some claim noble houses in highland cities like Aksum and Gondar would serve roasted insects as an amuse-bouche, especially during periods of drought. Others insist it was a commoner's secret one that later found its way into palace kitchens when the aristocracy discovered how good they were with chili. A quirky detail: some villagers once believed eating the queen termite's head granted visions of the future. Others used insect wings in love charms, grinding them into powder and adding them to wine. You make a mental note not to drink anything sparkling for the next hour. You try one of the sweet glazed ants. It's coated in honey and what tastes like ground coriander. It crunches, then dissolves, leaving a strangely floral aftertaste. A guest across from you nods approvingly and says that one was fed rose petals before it died. You're not sure if he's joking. You try not to think about that too hard. There's a rhythm to this dish crunch. Warmth, salt heat, a fast fade, and then the urge to do it again. Like popcorn, but existential. You start to lose count. At some point, someone pours you a sip of tej and tells you it balances the spirits. You drink it. You believe them. And suddenly you understand this dish isn't here to shock. It's here to remind you of the ground, of what moves beneath it, of what feeds in shadows, but can still end up on royal plates. The insects are cleared. A servant sprinkles dried herbs across your mat and waves a fan to refresh the air. The scent of eucalyptus fills the room. But before you can settle back into your cushion, the scent shifts again, deeper this time. Bitter, rooty, like damp wood and burnt bark. The next dish is boiled bark and charred roots. And apparently you're not done getting earthy just yet. The insects are gone, but the earthy crunch still lingers on your molars. You think you've earned a break, maybe some fruit, a soft cheese, a nap under the table. Nope. Instead, a wide low vessel is placed before you. Inside, thick wedges of something gnarled and fibrous float in a dark, steaming broth. It smells like wet firewood, peppercorn, and rain-soaked soil. Someone calls it simply the root and bark stew. You lean in and see chunks of what look like boiled tree bark singed at the edges, curled like scrolls. Among them are thick, starchy hunks of root inset, perhaps, or wild yam blackened and split down the middle to reveal a steaming white interior. There are herbs floating throughout, some of which you can't name and probably shouldn't. This dish doesn't pretend to be pretty. It smells of hearth smoke and medicine, the kind of thing a healer might hand you before a long walk into a dark forest. You take a bite. The bark is chewy. Not tender exactly. It's more like chewing something that wants to be wood, but changed its mind at the last second. The flavor is medicinal bittersweet, with hints of mint citrus rind and faint charcoal. The root, on the other hand, is soft, almost creamy, with a mild sweetness that saves the whole experience from becoming a foraging accident. It's not comfort food. It's ancestral food. According to tradition, this stew is eaten at threshold moments before long journeys, after illness, during seasonal transitions, or following rituals meant to release trapped emotions. The idea is simple: when your body or spirit is full of noise bark and root pull you back to earth. Historians still argue whether this dish was a common village remedy or a ritual meal reserved for monastic fasting and purification. Some ancient texts describe it as the food of shadows meant to prepare the eater for visions. Others claim it was pre-battle fair grounding warriors before combat, so they wouldn't drift into fear or ecstasy. No one agrees. Everyone respects it. And here's the quirky bit. The bark used is often from the cordia tree, whose fibers are also woven into scrolls for protective prayers. So yes, it's possible that what you're chewing once doubled as paper for holy ink. Multi-purpose bark. Medieval sustainability. You notice some diners dipping the bark in a thick black paste served on the side. It's a blend of burnt fenugreek and ash mixed with honey and lemon juice. One taste and you get why it adds complexity, smoothing out the bitterness like honey stirred into dark tea. A nearby monk mutters a blessing into his bowl before each bite. Another simply chews with his eyes closed, swaying slightly. You follow their lead, silent, mindful, focused. Each bite is an invitation to be here to pay attention. You think of your feet, your bones, the weight of your body pressing into the woven mat. For the first time tonight, you're not curious. You're quiet. And then, without warning, a jarring laugh explodes across the table. A group of younger guests are already teasing one another, pointing toward the next course. You smell it before you see it fire first salt and something metallic. The gold-dusted eggplants are coming, and apparently they sweat. The moment the bark and root stillness settles in your bones, it's shattered spectacularly by the arrival of a dish that practically glows. A broad bronze platter is unveiled with theatrical flair, and resting atop it is a glistening mountain of roasted eggplants, their skins wrinkled and crackling, their soft insides practically oozing gold. No, not metaphorical gold, actual edible gold dust scattered across the surface like pollen from some mythical flower. The aroma is outrageous, smoky sweet with hints of citrus and something wild lion sweat, someone whispers. You cough. The host grins. This is the Emperor's gold-dusted eggplants, a dish wrapped in legend and char. The eggplants are small and squat, likely the wild variety still grown in the highland valleys. They've been fire-roasted whole, then split and doused in a sauce made of fermented lemon-charred onions, berbere, and honey wine. And yes, for the finishing touch, someone has taken the time to sprinkle gold leaf delicately, reverently across the warm flesh, where it melts into the skin like sunlight absorbed by velvet. You tear a piece of injera and scoop up a bite. The flavor explodes. First, smoke deep, curling the taste of firewood and patience. Then sweetness, sharpness, heat, and something oddly musky. It's rich, almost feral. You chew slowly, reverently, glancing at the host as if to say, "Is that?" And he just nods. Lion sweat. No, really. Well, not literally. The phrase refers to a herbal tincture used in medieval Ethiopian cooking, a blend of wild rose citrus peel and a specific type of fermented seed oil known for its earthy pungency. It was said to mimic the heat and aroma of a lion's fur during mating season. Bold, primal, undeniably alive. Historians still argue whether the phrase originated from actual trade in lion musk, a rare and dangerous pursuit, or if it was always poetic, like calling something dragon's breath or tiger's milk. What's undeniable is the intent this dish was meant to impress, to overwhelm, to say, this feast is not like other feasts. And gold. That wasn't just for show. In medieval court traditions, edible gold was thought to carry the sun's purity, warding off spiritual illness and flattering the royal ego in one stroke. Whether it added flavor was debatable, but it certainly added a sense of drama. A quirky legend claims this dish was once served only during solar eclipses when the sun hid, and the people ate gold to bring it back. Another version says a jealous noble once tried to poison the emperor's eggplant, only to be undone by a slice of gold leaf that turned black upon contact with the toxin. Culinary lie detector anyone. You go in for a second bite. The skin is tender but resilient. The flesh inside is soft and savory sweet. The gold does nothing to the flavor, but your brain loves it. You feel rich, radiant, slightly ridiculous. Around you, guests are wiping gold off their lips, some smearing it like war paint, others licking their fingers with theatrical groans. The energy shifts from contemplative to triumphant. You've entered the decadent phase of the feast. But as the eggplants are cleared, a hush rolls through the room again. A monk taps his bowl 3 times. The air feels colder, even though the fires still burn. You hear a clink. A bowl of sour milk is coming. And with it, singing, Just as the gold-dusted eggplants fade from your tongue and your sense of economic proportion, a new scent wafts through the hall. This one is gentler, softer, but oddly sharp. It smells like rain on stone lemon rind and a distant goat. Then comes the sound, a slow, resonant hum, not from the guests, but from a trio of monks seated along the eastern wall. Each one holds a small ceramic bowl cradled like a relic, and as they hum, they stir the contents in slow, circular motions. You're handed your own bowl. It's warm in your palms. Inside, a thick white liquid with a slight shimmer. This is sour milk, ergo fermented, aged, and lightly seasoned with what looks like crushed garlic and wild mint. It's the antithesis of gold-dusted anything. You take a cautious sip. It hits hard. The sourness is immediate mouth-puckering intense, layered with an underlying creaminess and a lingering funk that makes your eyebrows rise involuntarily. Then the flavor softens, settles, and smooths out into something surprisingly refreshing. It tastes ancient, like time boiled down into dairy. The singing continues. This isn't just a palate cleanser, it's a ritual of focus. In monastic tradition, fermented milk was used to promote lucidity, clarity, and spiritual vision, particularly before chanting sessions that lasted all night. The sharpness woke the mind, the fat fed the body, and the chill in the belly was believed to quiet unnecessary emotion. Some guests drink with eyes closed. One slowly rocks back and forth. You sip again, more prepared this time, and begin to notice other flavors, maybe coriander, maybe fennel, maybe just the memory of a very intense sheep. The sensation is like drinking a hymn or a dare. Historians still argue whether this form of sour milk was strictly monastic or whether it traveled down the mountains and made its way into courtly banquets as a gesture of humility. One theory holds that offering guests fermented milk near the end of a meal signaled sober reflection, a transition from indulgence back to awareness. There's also a fringe belief, still whispered in rural circles, that this milk unlocks dreaming. That if consumed in total silence, it opens the ear of the soul, allowing you to hear whispers from your ancestors while you sleep. You can't prove that, of course, but you do notice the singing, slow, low harmonic changes after your third sip. It seems closer, clearer, as if it's not just around you, but inside you. A quirky tidbit. In some Ethiopian highland monasteries, bowls used for sour milk were carved with inverted prayers, mantras written backward, so that the milk, when stirred, read them correctly and absorbed their intent. You glance down into your bowl. The swirling surface says nothing, but it feels like a sentence forming. Then a bell rings. The singing stops. The bowls are collected, and suddenly the silence is broken by a shout laughter this time. Loud, rowdy. Someone is fanning their mouth with both hands. Another pours water over their tongue while weeping dramatically. The next dish has arrived. It's red. It's raw. It's weaponized. Welcome to the fire peppers of accidental duels. The silence from the sour milk fades like a ghost in smoke, replaced instantly by shouting, coughing, and something between laughter and gasping. You turn toward the commotion and spot the source, a guest dabbing their face with the hem of their tunic cheeks, flushed eyes wide. A small clay dish sits before them, empty except for a smear of bright red paste and a few shriveled pepper stems. You don't need to ask. You already know. The fire peppers have arrived. A server places a similar dish in front of you. It's deceptively simple. A few raw red chili pods, halved and glistening, surrounded by swirls of chili oil and dotted with crushed garlic, lemon peel, and what might be powdered charcoal. There is no warning label. There is no safety net. Just the peppers. Watching you. The host leans over with a sly smile. Tradition says you must try one. If you weep, you're honest. If you shout, you're brave. If you pass out, he shrugs, you'll be remembered. You pick the smallest piece, speared delicately on a sliver of injera. The others around you watch not out of politeness, but schadenfreude. The moment it touches your tongue, the effect is immediate. No buildup, no subtlety, just fire. Your eyes water. Your tongue turns into an open wound. Your lips feel like they've been kissed by the sun in a jealous rage. Somewhere deep in your chest, your lungs stage a protest. You try to breathe, but your throat has filed for early retirement. Then just as quickly, the pain becomes hilariously fun. Someone hands you a pinch of cool, crumbly cheese. You grab it like it's a life raft in a lava lake. It helps. Slightly. The heat never really disappears. It just relocates, settling somewhere in your jaw, your ears, your very identity. Raw chilies like these were considered sacred and dangerous in medieval Ethiopia. The Berber spice mix may have ruled the stew pots, but the raw pod, that was something else entirely. A test, a ritual, even a duel. Historians still argue whether these fire peppers were originally part of regular meals, or if they were served only in moments of public contest. Some texts suggest that warriors once settled arguments over land or livestock by eating peppers until one collapsed. Others believe it was a form of oath-making. You ate the heat to burn away lies. Tonight, it seems to be more entertainment than judgment, but still, the echoes of ceremony remain. A quirky belief. In some regions, it was said that if a pepper made your eyes tear but not your mouth burn, you were harboring a secret. If the opposite happened, mouth fire, dry eyes, it meant you were too honest. Balance was ideal, pain was data. You accept a piece of roasted barley bread, dipped in clarified butter, a trick the guests claim will seal the fire. It does help, but not before your ears start ringing and your nose reminds you it still exists. You laugh. Everyone laughs with you. Then one of the younger nobles leaps to his feet, red in the face, waving his empty pepper dish like a sword. I challenge the monk, he shouts, pointing dramatically. The monk, without expression, calmly eats 2 peppers at once, then returns to chanting softly over a bowl of lentils. Duels averted, but the fire remains. It rolls in your belly like a small, controlled volcano. And as the laughter fades and the heat subsides, a new scent emerges, softer, richer, something toasted, something whispering. The next dish doesn't speak in flames. It whispers in flour and herbs. You're about to eat the bread that whispers back. Your mouth is still smoldering from the fire peppers when the next dish arrives in perfect silence, as if the air itself doesn't dare interrupt. A round, flat loaf is placed before you. No glaze, no garnish, no spectacle. Just a modest circle of char-baked bread, scored with a spiral pattern that seems both intentional and listening. Someone whispers, "This is the one that talks back." You raise an eyebrow. Welcome to the whispering bread. The loaf is warm, rough-textured, and fragrant with herbs, thyme, rosemary, and rue. A faint dusting of crushed bark coats its surface like ashes on stone. When you tear off a piece, it resists slightly, then yields with a quiet crack, like a twig snapping in a sacred grove. The flavor is subtle at first, nutty, earthy, a touch of sour, but then something strange happens. As you chew, a cool tingle spreads across your tongue. Not minty, more like the taste of cold wind or the silence before a storm. You pause, blinking. No one says anything, which, of course, says everything. Tradition holds that this bread is baked only during certain phases of the moon, using flour mixed with powdered blue fennel seed, a rare herb harvested from the shadowed slopes of the Semian Mountains. The herb's essential oils, when activated by heat and moisture, were believed to heighten the senses, especially hearing. So yes, in a way, the bread does whisper back. Some say the bread lets you hear voices, ancestral, internal, divine. Others claim it simply quiets your mind until your own thoughts become audible. Either way, the experience is oddly personal. You close your eyes, chew slowly, and hear something. Not a voice exactly, more like a phrase remembered at the edge of sleep. Historians still argue whether the so-called whispering breads were actually meant to induce trance states, or if the effect was just the result of herbs, hunger, and atmosphere. Some suggest these loaves were used in trial rituals, where accused persons were asked to eat and reflect. If they claimed to hear nothing, they were declared liars. A quirky legend. In one village, it was said that if you fed a piece of whispering bread to a restless spirit, it would calm down enough to speak clearly and even answer a question. You're not sure how many of those conversations ended well. The loaf on your plate is nearly gone. You take another piece. The flavor deepens. The tingling returns. This time, your ears feel open like windows without glass. You can hear the fire more clearly, the scrape of a spoon 2 tables down, the murmur of someone praying quietly in the corner. You hear yourself breathing. You hear yourself listening. The bread doesn't tell you anything you don't already know, but it reminds you that you're paying attention. And in a world of feasts and fire gold and ghosts, that might be the rarest flavor of all. You exhale slowly and wipe your hands. Then you catch a new scent, rich, gamey, glazed with something sweet. A new dish is arriving larger than most and strangely elegant. The servant announces it with a grin camel tongue with grape honey glaze. You blink. This meal is full of surprises and apparently eloquence. The server walks in with practiced flair, carrying what looks like a polished wooden board draped with vines and steaming cloth. The moment the fabric is pulled back, a fragrant wave of caramelized meat and wild honey rolls across the banquet hall. All conversation softens. Laid neatly across the platter is a glistening reddish-pink slab, camel tongue delicately sliced and fanned out like flower petals. It's been slow roasted, then basted with a grape honey reduction, its surface lacquered to a gentle sheen. You stare at it for a moment. Camel tongue. Someone beside you raises their brow and mutters, "He who eats the tongue speaks truth all week." You hope that's metaphorical, or at least mildly flattering. You scoop a slice with your injera and bring it to your mouth. The texture surprises you. It's not rubbery as you feared, but incredibly tender, almost like brisket, but more delicate. The glaze hits first sweet tart, spiced with what might be cinnamon and smoked cardamom. Then comes the richness of the tongue itself, dense savory, slightly grassy in that unmistakable way only camel meat can be. The blend of flavors is a revelation. The sweetness of the grape honey crushed from highland vines aged in clay jars perfectly offsets the gaminess of the tongue. The result is not indulgent, but measured, refined, like a diplomat wearing a velvet cloak over a steel breastplate. In medieval Ethiopia, camel meat was rare, but camel tongue, that was luxury with a message. Served at royal banquets to honor foreign guests, it symbolized intelligence, eloquence, and endurance. Eating it was believed to impart wisdom not just to speak well, but to know when not to speak at all. Historians still argue whether this dish was reserved for desert emissaries, guests from Somali or afar regions, or whether it also featured in coronations or festivals linked to rain rituals. After all, camels represented wealth and survival in arid lands. Serving one's tongue at a feast was a diplomatic nod, like offering someone both hospitality and your best proverb in one bite. And here's the quirky part. One old folktale insists that if you eat camel tongue and tell a lie within 3 days, you'll lose your ability to taste sweet things, a subtle but devastating curse. You take a second bite and resolve to be brutally honest this week. Probably. The meat is garnished with toasted sesame and slivers of preserved lemon. It adds a brightness, a flash of acidity to keep the richness in check. You chase it with a sip of cold tej, and the honey notes bloom across your palate, pulling everything together like the final line in a very old poem. A priest nearby dips a finger in the glaze and paints a small spiral on his wrist, a blessing perhaps, or a reminder. You do the same. It feels right. Then a child no older than 8 walks by with a large tray of tiny speckled eggs. Everyone falls silent. Not because it's unusual, but because it's never clear what kind of eggs they are. A guest grins at you and whispers, "Guess wrong," and you owe the cook a song. You smile nervously. The eggs are warm, the shells soft, and somewhere nearby, something feathered is rustling with great indignation. You're about to meet the mystery eggs. The tray of eggs is set down with theatrical care, and the cloth lifted with a flourish. Before you lies a perfectly ordered spiral of tiny speckled eggs, still warm, their shells faintly glossy, from a light rub of clarified butter and ash-infused salt. They range in size, some barely bigger than a thumb joint, others plump as apricots. You glance around. No one's reaching for them yet. Then the host leans forward with a sly smile. "These are the mystery eggs," he says. "One is quail. One is hawk. One is possibly sacred." A few guests murmur quietly. A man 2 seats over whispers, "I once bit into an egg and dreamed of fire for 3 nights. Someone else chimes in, "Mine had feathers. I still ate it." You try not to look alarmed. In medieval Ethiopian feasts, these wild-sourced eggs weren't just food. They were games, omens, and tiny edible rituals. Sourced from quails, guinea fowl, pigeons, ibises, and occasionally something far less identifiable, the eggs were gently roasted in hot ash, then rubbed with herbal oils to enhance their natural flavor or to disguise it, depending on your level of optimism. You choose one, a small ivory-speckled orb with a dark ring at one end. You crack it open. The shell flakes, gently revealing a golden yolk tinged with green, roasted just enough to keep the center soft and jammy. You take a bite. It's rich, creamy, slightly gamey with a wild metallic edge, like roasted butter infused with pine smoke. Definitely not chicken, probably not quail, possibly some kind of sky spirit in disguise. And then it hits you, the aftertaste is sweet, faintly honeyed with a grassy herbal note that seems to drift upward into your sinuses. You sit back, blinking. A few other guests are doing the same, nodding slowly, as if parsing out secret messages in the flavor. Historians still argue whether the practice of serving mystery eggs was a divination ritual, a culinary joke, or a test of hospitality. Some say that eating the wrong egg, say one laid in a temple courtyard, was considered an affront to the spirits and required atonement through dance. Others believe it was a mark of trust, signaling that a guest was brave enough to eat without knowing what they were consuming. A quirky bit: in some villages, feathered dramas followed the eggs. A goose duck or even a rooster would be released after the dish allowed to wander the banquet. Whoever the animal approached first was said to have received the second yolk, a blessing or a challenge depending on how much wine had been consumed. You crack open a second egg, and just as you bring it to your lips, there's a sharp honking sound. You turn just in time to see a large, angry goose strutting directly toward you, flapping its wings with a vengeance. Guests cheer. Some applaud. The host laughs and says, "Ah, the goose has chosen." You freeze. The goose pecks your ankle twice, then wanders off with smug satisfaction. A nearby noble pats your back. "You'll either find love or lose a shoe," he says. You check your feet. The shoes are still there. Love remains to be seen. You eat the egg. This one is lighter, almost citrusy. You swear it blinks at you, but that might be the goose-induced adrenaline. As the eggs are cleared, guests are still laughing. Someone tries to gift the goose a garland. It bites their finger. Then the room stills again. A new dish arrives dark and warm. There's no guessing game here. It's dessert. But of course, because it's this feast, it's not cake or syrup. It's made of ashes. And it smells wonderful. The laughter from the goose encounter fades into the embers, and a calm settles over the hall once more. You've tasted fire gold and ghost bread, surely now, at last, something gentle. Then comes dessert. It arrives not on a plate, but in a carved gourd bowl, wrapped in a cloth that smells like cinnamon bark and charcoal. When the cloth is pulled back, you blink. The dessert is black. Not dark brown, not chocolatey black like midnight soot. It glistens faintly, steam rising in thin, spiraling threads. The host announces it simply ash pudding. The name isn't poetic, it's literal. Made from the burned leaves of banana plants, slow cooked with fermented sugarcane juice and ground NSET starch. This pudding is the final offering in a medieval banquet designed to bring the body back to earth, sweet, smoky, and utterly strange. You dip your spoon in. It's thick, dense, and slightly sticky. You taste. And, oh, the first note is smoke clean, not acrid, like the comforting scent of a campfire dying down. Then comes a strange but wonderful sweetness, dark sugar molasses, maybe tamarind, and a floral note like rose petals left to dry in the sun. The texture is chewy like warm fudge with faint bits of crunch that might be toasted seeds or something less obvious. It doesn't scream dessert. It whispers, it hums it like the final line of a lullaby. Historians still argue whether ash-based sweets were developed from scarcity rituals, ways to use every last resource during famines, or whether they originated as spiritual food reserved for moments of mourning or seasonal change. Some scrolls describe ash pudding served at funeral feasts, meant to symbolize rebirth, the sweetness that follows the flame. Others believe it was favored by mystics who claimed that eating the burned leaves lets you taste what the fire spared. A quirky tradition. In some households, a single coin was hidden inside the pudding. Whoever found it was said to hold the blessing of the forgotten, destined for good luck and curious dreams. You glance down just in case. You take another bite. The flavor deepens more herbal now and faintly salty. Someone has added dried basil or rue, maybe to balance the sugar. It's complex, comforting, a little eerie, and impossible to stop eating. Around you, the mood has shifted again. Guests eat slowly, thoughtfully. The goose is finally asleep in the corner, its feathers rising and falling with each breath. A child nearby hums a soft, tuneless melody. Someone else pours the last of the tej into their bowl of pudding, causing a small burst of steam and laughter. And for a brief moment, everything just pauses. The air is warm. Your belly is full, and the firelight seems to flicker in rhythm with your heartbeat. Then you hear it a gentle drumbeat and the scent of incense and salt rising again. One more dish is coming, savory, simple, silent. Salted bones, with elders who remember laughter as a seasoning. You're lulled by the ash pudding's warmth, its bittersweet mystery still clinging to the corners of your mouth when the sound of bones clinking in a bowl draws your attention back to the flickering firelight. The next dish arrives in near silence, as if its presence alone demands reverence. A wide clay bowl is set before you, heavy with history. Inside lie marrow bones split lengthwise to reveal glistening golden centers, nestled among strips of salt bark, rough-hewn and dusted with powdered herbs. This is the salted bones and laughing elders dish. The bones are not decorative. They are the main event. Slow-roasted ox or goat femurs, their interiors rich with bone marrow, still warm, still trembling slightly, as if unsure it wants to be eaten. There is no cutlery, only splinters of flatbread hollowed reeds, or if you're brave, a direct suck from the bone. You reach for one and lift it carefully. It's hot, smooth, and faintly sticky, with a glaze made from reduced sorghum beer and crushed garlic skins. You scoop a bit of marrow with a finger of bread and taste it. It's magnificent. Creamy, salty, earthy, almost buttery, with an aftertaste that dances somewhere between roasted meat and roasted root. It clings to the tongue in the best way, dense but alive. Then you crunch a strip of the salt bark, thin shavings of a local shrub cured in brine and dried over smoke. It cracks like brittle glass, and its sharp mineral tang slices straight through the fat of the marrow, creating a perfect, ancient balance. You notice an elder across the fire, gnawing directly on the bone, chuckling softly to himself. Another gently taps her bone on the rim of the bowl 3 times before eating. You're told it's an old habit, a way of letting the spirit out first, so it doesn't follow you home. Historians still argue whether marrow bones were simply poverty food, turned noble, or always considered a delicacy among warriors and elders. Some claim bones were shared only among those who had lost family in battle as a gesture of honoring the strength left behind. Others say bones were banquet staples prized for their nutritional power and ceremonial crunch. And here's the quirky bit. There's a belief that if your bone cracks loudly when you bite, it means you've been too quiet lately, a sign from the ancestors to speak up. If it crumbles silently, you've spoken enough for now. You chew carefully, listening to your marrow's verdict. Your first bite echoes loudly through the bowl. Guests nearby chuckle. A woman to your left sighs and says, "When I was a child, we used to hide notes in the marrow holes, tiny scrolls of paper soaked in tej, love notes, or recipes." You suddenly feel like this food knows more about your soul than you do. As you continue eating, you notice the fire's rhythm has slowed. The elders are the only ones still speaking, laughing softly, remembering telling half-stories in old dialects no one translates, but everyone understands. This part of the banquet is not for spectacle. It's for remembrance, for chewing not talking, for honoring what came before, and filling what might still be missing. The bones are cleared. You lean back. You think it's over, but it's not. A servant appears with a cloth blindfold and a bowl covered in silver leaves, and someone whispers, "Now comes the hidden dish. No eyes, no lies. Your next course, the dish you must eat blindfolded." The silver-leafed bowl is placed before you with solemn precision, and a servant steps forward, holding a length of deep blue cloth, soft as smoke and worn at the edges. Without a word, they tie it around your head, drawing it snug across your eyes. Suddenly the world shrinks. No light, just warmth, sounds, scents, the rustle of clothing, the crackle of the fire, your heartbeat echoing softly behind your ears. You've entered the hidden course of the banquet, the dish you must eat, blindfolded. No one explains what it is. That's the point. You feel a warm bowl placed in your hands, rough ceramic, faintly chipped at the rim, as if it's been used many times by many hands. The scent rising from it is strange and familiar all at once, earthy, sharp, sweet, maybe meaty, maybe not. You honestly can't tell. Your fingers brush the rim again, then dip cautiously into the dish. The texture is soft but firm. Maybe a dumpling, maybe fruit, maybe something in between. You lift a piece to your mouth and bite. The flavor explodes first, sweet, then sour, then spicy, then almost metallic, then back to sweet again. It's chewy, sticky, and lightly crisp on one side. You taste clove, tamarind, honey, and something green, fresh herbs, or maybe shredded leaves. And then something smoky charred. You take a deep breath, chew again. The flavor shifts as you move it around your mouth. It's ever-changing, like a dream you keep re-entering in new clothes. A voice nearby intones gently, "The tongue lies, the eye lies, but the belly knows truth." This dish isn't about flavor, it's about honesty. According to tradition, the hidden dish is prepared by a different cook each time with no recipe. The goal isn't to impress, it's to reveal. The ingredients are chosen based on how the cook feels about the guest. A secret language, a coded meal. You're eating an opinion seasoned and steamed. Historians still argue whether this blindfold course originated as a test of humility for nobles or as a quiet protest by cooks who had no voice at the table. Some scholars argue that the earliest references describe it being served during marriage ceremonies, where each partner would eat blindfolded and describe what they felt. Compatibility was measured not by words, but by flavor interpretation. A quirky tradition. In some households, if the blindfolded guest guessed 2 ingredients correctly, they were deemed clear-eyed. Guess 3 blessed. Guess none. Probably cursed, but in an interesting way. You think about what you've tasted. Is that lentil no fig? Maybe both. Something nutty. Was there goat? Is there always goat? You hear gentle laughter from a few places around you. One guest announces mango, lime, and onion. Another shouts, "It was nothing." The bowl was empty. The room laughs again. You remove the blindfold. The firelight returns golden and soft. Around you, guests blink and squint like waking from a nap. The bowl in your hand still holds a few pieces of the mystery. You decide not to look, because maybe that's the point. The dish is collected without fanfare. A silence falls not heavy but peaceful, like the air after a confession. You lean back into the cushions, belly full of questions and fermented wonder. A final drumbeat sounds low, slow, steady, but it's not quite over, because now the monks are bringing out the cheese. And this one, it sings. You've survived the blindfold dish barely, and the mood has shifted again. Not solemn this time, but light, almost mischievous. Someone nearby chuckles for no clear reason. Another guest taps their bowl like a bell. The room is expectant tuned. Then the monks arrive. They carry small wooden trays wrapped in cloth, each holding a waxy palm-sized wheel of cheese. The rind is pale and speckled with herbs. The texture looks semi-soft, faintly glossy, and slightly damp from where it's been pressed in banana leaves and stone molds. The host gestures grandly. "Behold the cheese that sings." You blink. It's not a metaphor. The moment your tray is placed down, you hear it a faint squeaking, like 2 fingers rubbing together across polished wood. The monk nearest to you cuts his wheel in half, and the sound sharpens a high-pitched squeal, short and bright, like a mouse's whisper. This is cheery, a rare goat's milk cheese made only during the deep, rainy season, aged with wild thyme pepper flour and a peculiar vine ash that alters the protein structure. The result, when it's sliced, chewed, or warmed, it squeaks. You slice a piece. It resists the blade with a rubbery bounce, then yields with a tiny chirp. You bring it to your mouth and bite. It squeaks against your teeth. You pause. Everyone around you is grinning. Then you chew, and the flavor blooms. It's tart, slightly funky, grassy, with undertones of lemon peel and something bright and herbal. The salt is light, the texture chewy, but satisfying, and the squeak. It somehow makes the whole experience feel more alive, as though the cheese knows it's being eaten and has decided to laugh along with you. Historians still argue whether this cheese was ever served at court or whether it remained a village secret for centuries. Some records describe it being eaten during harvest dances paired with roasted garlic and cucumber wine. Others claim that singers in monastic choirs would chew it before services to warm the throat and lighten the soul. A quirky tradition. Children were once told that if the cheese stopped squeaking in your mouth, it meant you had told a lie recently. If it squeaked louder than expected, it meant the cheese approved of you. You take another bite. It squeaks proudly. You feel affirmed. Then someone starts humming a single clear note, followed by a second voice, then a third. The monks join in, forming a simple rising chant that matches the cheese's pitch. People begin chewing in rhythm. The fire crackles. The cheese squeaks. The chant builds. You're in a room of singing people and food that sings with them. And somehow this feels exactly right. The chant fades gently. The last slice of cherry melts quietly on your tongue. You wipe your fingers on a cloth embroidered with vines and stars. Then the host stands. It is time, he says, for the final plate. A server enters, carrying a black stone slab layered high with foods you've tasted all evening, each one stacked, pressed shaped. A story in layers. A feast in miniature. They call it Echoes of the Ancestors, and you are about to eat memory itself. The hall dims. Not all at once, more like a candle's sigh, as if the very walls know that the journey is reaching its final chapter. And into that hush comes the final dish, cradled on a slab of obsidian cool and gleaming like the surface of a quiet lake. It's called Echoes of the Ancestors. The name isn't symbolic, it's literal. The slab holds a layered creation, one part feast, one part altar. A composition of tiny portions from everything you've eaten tonight, each carefully shaped into a miniature, a rose-petal lentil. Smear here, a thimble-sized scoop of ash pudding. There, a curled sliver of camel tongue, a ghost-thin chip of cheese that still squeaks softly when lifted. But there's more. Between each food lies something else, threads of smoked flax, pinches of soil-infused salt drizzles of aged honey, and most curious of all ashes, in fine calligraphic swirls. You realize the design isn't random. It's text. Sacred writing, a map, a recipe. No one says. You pick up a piece of bark root crisp spread with a shimmering eggplant puree and bite. It's every flavor you've met tonight but quieter, like a memory retasted. You eat slowly, reverently. The pieces are small, but each one opens something, a scent, a sound, a faint flicker of emotion you hadn't realized was yours. One bite makes you remember the fire pepper duel. Another brings the whispering bread back in full, like a voice behind your shoulder. Another tastes unmistakably like the moment the goose bit your ankle. You smile. This isn't just food. This is the retelling of everything you've survived, a way of saying you were here, you tasted this, you listened. Historians still argue whether this echo plate was ever really served in medieval banquets, or if it was a later invention by ritual cooks and poetic monks. Some say it originated with mourning feasts, where the deceased's favorite dishes were recreated in fragments then shared in silence. Others believe it was a way to close a gathering so no flavor lingered alone. A quirky belief. If you can guess all the ingredients on your echo plate, it's said you'll remember the night in dreams for the next 7 evenings. You try to identify what's in front of you, but some of the elements have changed. The lentils now have a hint of cinnamon that wasn't there before. The cheese is speckled with something blue. The porridge hums, and then you understand the echo changes as you do. This final dish isn't just a summary, it's a reflection. And just like memory, it's not always accurate, but it's still true. You finish the last piece, a tiny rolled strip of injera soaked in tej and dusted with powdered horn pepper, sweet, sour, and sharp. The server bows slightly and removes the slab. The room is quiet again. The fire has faded to red glow embers. The final incense burns low, curling into the rafters like breath after prayer. Someone whispers, "You are full." But it doesn't feel heavy. It feels anchored, warm, alive. The feast is done, but not quite. Because now the host stands and says gently, "Let us pick our teeth and remember what we've survived." A servant steps forward holding a polished ivory stick dipped in spice oil. Yes, it's time for the royal toothpick. The final dishes are cleared. The echoes now only sense in the air and warmth in your belly. You think surely, this is the end. But then the host, now barefoot and smiling like a man with one last joke, raises a hand. A servant approaches not with food, but with a small lacquered box carved from sandalwood and inlaid with obsidian stars. It opens with a soft click, and inside lies a single object, an ivory toothpick gleaming faintly, its tip already dipped in dark golden oil. The host holds it aloft. Tonight, he says softly, you have eaten with your hands, your soul, your fears, and your dreams. This final touch for your mouth, but more so for your memory. He gestures, and a server walks to you, holding out the second more modest toothpick. Yours is made of carved bone wrapped at the base with a ribbon of dried herbs, rue thyme, maybe the whisper of wild mint. The scent is bright and spicy clove oil with maybe a touch of frankincense. You lift it gently to your lips. Not to use yet, to smell. This is the royal toothpick ritual, the final gesture of the medieval Ethiopian banquet, a moment of reflection, flavor, and reset. It isn't about hygiene, it's symbolic. To pick your teeth here is to say, I have tasted enough. I will carry nothing forward but what belongs to me. You gently press the tip to your gum line and feel a subtle tingle, cool and clean. The clove burns faintly. The oil seeps in like memory. It's not just about clearing the palate. It's about sealing the mouth so the feast's magic doesn't leak out. Historians still argue whether this practice was a genuine royal tradition or a ritualized embellishment introduced by monastic poets. Some say that only emperors were allowed clove-tipped picks. Others insist even shepherds use them on feast days, dipping toothpicks in olive oil thyme or crushed eucalyptus and murmuring silent thanks as they did. And here's the quirky bit. In some households, guests would keep the toothpick, tying it with thread, and placing it above their door to ward off hunger or to remind them that fullness is a choice, not an accident. Around you, everyone is silent, picking gently, not scraping, not rushing, just reflecting. A soft drumbeat resumes thump, 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 and then a final chime. The host lowers his hand. It is finished, he says, but not quite, because now a servant steps forward carrying a folded blanket and a tiny clay cup of spiced water, and you realize they've thought of everything. The banquet is over, but rest is part of the meal. The fire has faded to glowing coals. The chatter has dissolved into soft murmurs and sighs. A few guests lean against one another. Others lie back, arms crossed over full stomachs, smiling in that glassy-eyed way that only true satisfaction brings. And then, without fanfare, a final offering. A servant places a folded woolen blanket on your lap, woven in a tight diamond pattern, the kind shepherds once used in the Simeon Highlands to ward off wind and fog. It's soft from wear, heavy enough to anchor your breath. You drape it over your knees instinctively, and suddenly you're rooted not just to the floor, but to the night. Then comes the clay cup, small handmade, its rim uneven but warm to the touch. Inside spiced water, flavored faintly with coriander seed, toasted barley, and lemon rind. It's not hot, just warm enough to chase the last ghosts of spice from your throat. You sip slowly. It's perfect. This is the unsung final course of the medieval Ethiopian banquet. Not food, not drink, closure. A gift of warmth, hydration, and stillness. Because eating well was never just about indulgence. It was about remembering how to be quiet after so much joy. You look around. The hall glows with candle ends. Ash curls upward from the incense pots, forming lazy spirals. One monk hums gently. Another naps upright. A noble rocks a small child who's snoring softly into their shoulder. The spiced water sits in your belly like a promise you are safe now. You are fed. Historians still debate whether this wind-down ritual was part of formal protocol or simply something that emerged naturally, like the hush after thunder. Some believe it was tied to fasting cycles, this moment of silence acting as the official bookend before returning to abstinence. Others think it was purely emotional etiquette, an agreed-upon way to say, let the evening settle in your bones. A quirky tradition. In some villages, the blanket was passed from guest to guest, like a torch. Whoever kept it at the end of the night was tasked with telling the story of the meal the next morning. A warm prize and a heavy responsibility. Tonight, you hold yours a little tighter, just in case. You finish the water. The host claps once softly. A servant begins to extinguish the candles with a pinch of salt. And then silence. Not empty, but echoing with every dish, every flavor, every fire pepper, and ghost whisper and goat side eye. The feast has ended, but you feel whole. Full not just of food, but of place, of story. And just when you think it's truly over, you hear a soft rustling behind you. Because apparently, there's still one last dish. A final offering from the monks, and it doesn't come on a plate. It comes in dreams. You don't see them enter, no footsteps, no fanfare, but suddenly the monks are there gathered in a quiet line near the smoldering hearth. They carry no platters, no bowls, no jugs, only a folded cloth, a pot of scented oil, and a small bundle of dried leaves tied with red string. The host, now seated cross-legged like everyone else, looks up and speaks softly. This final dish cannot be eaten. It must be remembered. You sit straighter, uncertain. Your blanket rustles in your lap like a whisper. The monks begin moving around the room, and one by one they visit each guest. They press a hand to your shoulder, dab a finger of lemon thyme oil on your forehead, place one dried leaf bundle in your palm, still warm, faintly perfumed with lavender smoke and clove. They say nothing. This is the final ritual, a dish not for the body, but for the mind at rest. A gesture known in old monastic circles as Yemasir Mankalesh, the remembering gift. The bundle in your hand is meant to be taken home, or placed under your sleeping mat, or burned before your next dream. It's made of the same herbs used in the feast, now dried and blessed, bound with string, soaked in teff beer and ink. The scent grounds you. You suddenly feel as if the entire night has curled up inside it, waiting patiently for sleep to arrive. Historians still argue whether this ritual was ever part of the original feast or a later invention by wandering monks seeking to turn meals into meditation. Some believe it was designed for travelers so they could carry the taste of the highlands with them into distant lands. Others insist it was meant only for the terminally ill, those who would not see another banquet, and who needed to leave with their senses fully blessed. A quirky tradition, in one highland village, guests were told to whisper a question into the bundle before sleeping. If the herbs were placed beneath the pillow, the answer would come in the voice of an ancestor, clear, direct, and impossible to ignore. You hold your bundle a little closer. The scent shifts with each breath: earth fire, honey ash, ghost mint. Every bite, every voice, every moment of this feast seems to have folded itself into this one final fragment of the night. And then the monks bow once, slowly. No one claps. No one speaks. There's nothing left to say. The feast has come full circle, from hand to mouth to fire to echo to silence. You place the bundle in your lap. You close your eyes, and you listen to the hush that follows a perfect story. But just when you think you've truly reached the end, one final dish remains. And it isn't on the table. It's in the sky, because the night is about to wind down. The embers are nearly gone now, just soft glows buried under ash. The candles have burned low, their wicks curling in tiny spirals. Outside, the wind stirs the grass like a whisper, running its fingers through the dark. The feast is over, but the night is still wrapping you in its arms. One final moment lingers unspoken and unserved the sky itself. You glance up through the smoke hole in the roof. Above, a black velvet sky scattered with stars, some bright, some faded, some pulsing, faintly like fireflies in a dream. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of spilled flour and silver thread. No more dishes, no more flavors. Now it's time for silence to do the cooking. You pull the blanket a little higher and let your body soften. Your stomach is full, completely cosmically full, but not heavy. The feast hasn't burdened you. It's carried you. Through roots and rivers, gold and goat whispers and fire, through vision, voice, song, and memory. And now it carries you into rest. The guests lie back. The monks vanish like mist. Even the goose, once an agent of chaos, sleeps peacefully near the door, tucked into the corner like a feathery punctuation mark. The host speaks one final time, barely more than a breath. You are here. You tasted what we remembered, and now may it carry you to the softest kind of sleep. And with that, the story ends, not with a bang, but with a drifting hush and the scent of burnt bark and wild honey still curling in the back of your mind. You exhale, let your limbs melt into the mat, and let the dream begin.